The meeting was scheduled for 6:30 until 9 p.m., but I will say that if we conclude and everybody's had an opportunity for public comment and ask questions, we will conclude early. I know everybody's time is valuable. And again, this is a public meeting and an opportunity for comment on draft stormwater discharge permit 6216 INDS.A. It's a renewal of the Kingdom Community Wind project in Lowell. The public comment period started on March 16th and will conclude on June 23rd, 7 days after tonight's meeting. So if there is something you want to submit in writing, tonight is not your only opportunity. You can still do so through the agency website. And that's through the ENB or Environmental Notice Bulletin. In response to comments tonight, we may be able to offer some response or answer some questions, but most often technical questions require further review. So please understand that you might provide a comment that we can't answer without a little bit more detailed review of the application and consideration. A complete response to all public comments is always provided in the form of a response summary that is issued in conjunction with a decision on the application and permit. Another housekeeping item, if you're used to Microsoft Teams, it does have a chat feature, but that feature tonight is disabled. It's not going to be used for public comment. So if you do have a problem or a technical problem and need to reach out, you could send either myself an email or Patrick Monks an email, and we can try to straighten out any technical issues. So with that, in terms of providing public comment, Microsoft Teams does have a raise your hand feature at the top of the screen. It's a little hand icon if you're not familiar with it. That is a way in which you could, when it's time to comment or ask questions, raise your hand and we can call on you so that we're not speaking over each other. And then now I'm going to just give a brief overview of the project applicable to the permit on notice. And then the permittee, applicant, in this case, Green Mountain Power, will also have an opportunity to speak before we begin answering general questions. And then after that, we can answer any questions on process and then perhaps get into actual formal public comments that folks might have on this particular application. So with that, I'll just give a quick overview of the Kingdom Community Wind project that's the subject of this permit. The project, as some know, was initially issued an operational stormwater discharge permit in August of 2011. The permit covers the discharge of stormwater runoff from impervious surfaces on the project site. The project was issued what's called an individual permit because the stormwater design included alternative stormwater treatment system consisting of level spreaders and down gradient 150-foot vegetated buffers. And that was to manage and treat stormwater from the impervious surfaces. In addition, the project did involve more traditional stormwater infrastructure, such as stormwater ponds, grass channels, dry basins, and even an infiltration basin. Because of the alternative design, the permit included a requirement to implement and complete a monitoring plan following construction, and that was conditioned in the previously issued permit. And the purpose of that was to verify that the alternative system they installed was in fact meeting applicable performance standards. So the current permit that's on notice now will renew that permit and amend that permit. The amended conditions of the permit that's drafted today will include the agency's approval of the completed monitoring of that alternative system and acceptance by the agency that the design meets applicable performance goals. And then the amended permit also approves the relocation and shifting of level spreaders that were previously permitted on the project. So that was a lot to summarize, but I hope that gives some folks that are unfamiliar with the permit a little bit of an overview. And we can answer questions in a few minutes. But with that, I do want to open the meeting up to Green Mountain Power if they would like to speak to the project and the permit on notice.
Sure. Good evening, Kevin. Hello, everybody. My name is Jason Lisai. I'm the Director of Generation and Relay and Veg Management for Green Mountain Power. Part of that role includes oversight of maintenance and operating activities at our generating facilities and at Kingdom Community Wind that we're discussing this evening. I've been involved with Kingdom Wind for approximately 10 years. So myself and the team that work on this have ensured that the site continues to generate clean energy that benefits our customers and has been in compliance with our regulatory obligations. We appreciate the ability to introduce this and participate in this evening for the DEC's draft operational stormwater permit renewal for Kingdom Wind. Kevin hit on some of the main descriptions of the site, so I'll pass over that. I will say that it has included regular detailed inspections, continue to demonstrate that the site continues to be effective in ensuring compliance as well as meeting our regulatory obligations. We've reviewed the DEC's draft operational permit, and we do believe the renewed permit, as well as like the original permit, will continue to protect the water quality in and around the site, and that the permit does have all the conditions necessary to maintain Vermont's water quality standards. We do have our technical experts on this call to listen into the public and to Kevin and his staff, and we will be following up with a written response, as Kevin had noted, after the hearing as needed. And lastly, just want to thank the DEC for pulling together the draft permit in these strange times we seem to be coming out of, which is great. Hopefully, the next time we have a public hearing, we'll be seeing each other in person. Appreciate the public's participation and look forward to a good public hearing tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. So with that, there's a number of folks here tonight. I expect that there's probably a number of folks that are either just on a call-in line, but it looks like we do have a fair number just attending in Microsoft Teams. But before we actually get into public comment, I did want to just quickly go around and ask if anybody has any just general questions, process, how this works, what we're doing here, anything of that sort.
Kevin, if I could,
yes,
if I could just ask, doesn't appear that you're recording this. Why are you not recording this? And was it intended not to be recording so we don't have a record of the hearing?
Is that John?
Yeah.
John, the meeting was being recorded before you joined, I think. It still is being recorded.
Okay. Oh, good. All right. Thank you.
Are you okay with being recorded? I'll take that.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So I guess just if anybody has any other general questions on the process and so forth, certainly put your hand up and we can address it. Otherwise, I'd ask that folks that do want to provide a formal public comment at tonight's meeting to use the raise hand feature, and we can try to call on you and allow you to provide comment. I think I would just ask that, as you begin providing comment, it would be helpful for you to state your name first or your organization if you're representing one, so that we have a clear record. So with that, I would like to open the meeting to public comment on the draft permit. Justin, it seems like you're the first one to raise the hand. Would you like to provide comment? And you need to unmute first, of course.
There we go. I hate electronic stuff. Can you hear me now? Great. The first general comment, or specific comment actually, is that it lists 27 acres of impervious surface. I would like to be provided a map or figures or something describing that 27 plus acres. My quick figuring shows that it's a lot more than that. So that's just one comment, and I'll get along with my rest of it. In my opinion, the changes to this draft stormwater permit should be such, the number one thing is we need, in my opinion, independent experts, not experts picked by the company, because I've seen things that are very questionable up there to monitor these systems. One of which is the level spreader overflow. In some of these level spreaders, there's too much volume and velocity going over the level spreader lip. And it's actually raising root hairs in the forest floor and in streams directly below these level spreaders. And as everybody knows, when you raise root hairs, you've done something wrong. That means way too much water. It's doing something that has never been done in there before. And you just don't do that. And another thing is they're putting, or they did put dead logs down to try to mitigate that and pound them into the ground, but that actually has made it worse. It makes the water velocity increase going over the log down the other side or around the edge of the log. So that sort of mitigation, that's why we need independent look at this. And the iron flock, we want to know whether that's properly dealt with. Doesn't appear to be right yet. Another thing is the southern end of the project is puzzling to me. There is a stream coming out of a tremendous amount of blasted rock that was creating the road. And near this stream, about 100 yards out, are dead trees. Now, I know there's dead trees along the crane path and other developed areas, but this is way away from it. I'm suspecting that water needs to be tested coming out of that blasted rock. We know that the Lowell Mountain has serpentine on it, which has some very nasty metals in it, similar to the Eden Mine on the other side. Of course, Eden Mine has a lot more serpentine than Lowell Mountain does, but we found a lot of serpentine on Lowell Mountain, which brings me to my last point, and that is that we need to have the sediment that's taken out of these settlement ponds actually tested for heavy metals and other things. And for one thing, the brook trout down below are killed very quickly by a lot of heavy metals. They can't take this kind of stuff, as well as the phosphorus that gets released. How it's stored, it should be stored differently if they find heavy metals or whatever. But that and the temperature up there, the temperature whenever the sun beats on all those blasted rocks increases severely, and that should be tested in the waters. Thank you very much for my comments.
Thank you, Justin. There's quite a bit in your comments that we'll certainly need to review. And we are aware of a lot of the locations that you've spoke of, where you've indicated that logs were placed and different things in the forest. And if you do need a map of the impervious surface that's covered in the permit, I expect there's one available. We can provide that to you.
Thank you.
Mark Whitworth, would you like to comment?
I have a question about some of Justin Lindholm's comments, and I'm wondering if the permit allows for the installation of wooden water bars.
The permit's not relying on wooden water bars for treatment and control of stormwater runoff. I'm not aware of wooden water bars that are used on any of the impervious surface. I do know there's water bars up there from being
Justin
up there.
Justin just described the use of felled trees to control water. Is that permitted under the state's permit?
I think what he might be referring to is maintenance activity and not felled trees for use of water bars, but we can certainly look into that. You know, that's not one of the specific treatment practices. John?
Yeah. Hi, Kevin. Thank you.
Good to see you.
You too. I'm not being a dead horse to death here, or a horse to death, but I want to drill down on your statements that the logs that you mentioned you knew about being placed in the forest, that's your statement, are for maintenance. What are they maintaining? What is your understanding that they are maintaining?
John, I just indicating that, you know, they're below level spreaders or in level spreaders, there's stormwater maintenance that occurs. We have severe winters, we have lots of snow melt, and, you know, often there's different activities that need to be conducted to maintain these features. And there was a particular level spreader that, you know, water may have, you know, gone one way and gone the other, but, you know, generally working. So this is just general maintenance that isn't identified as a problem, and I stand by that from having seen it in person. There's really no issue there.
So in follow-up, my understanding of the level spreaders functionally is to prevent channelized flow from coming off the impervious surfaces on that site. Am I correct? That's the idea, to spread the flow wider than it otherwise would flow off the impervious surfaces. I think actually that's not a question. That is what they're supposed to do. So if logs are then placed downstream of level spreaders to prevent channelized flow, is that not a further treatment approach? And is that not something that should be acknowledged in the engineering plans and therefore referenced? You know, you have 50 system treatment areas referenced in the permit, listed out in the permit. It would seem that if there are additional methodologies in place, whether they are below or beside or to mitigate failures of the level spreaders, I understand. I mean, I was up there too and saw that the level spreader having failed, meaning that the water ran out one side or the other, or in a particular, through a notch in the level spreader. If those logs are used to mitigate the damage from that, that is then a technology or a construction of an improvement. Your permit talks about construction of improvements, or whatever the terminology is, construction of systems on the site. It would seem that it would be appropriate that your permit and that the applicant amend the permit application to acknowledge these additional systems that are designed or emplaced, I guess, to mitigate the effects of, you know, the level spreader not functioning adequately at all times.
I think you make some points, John, but, you know, I mean, we're talking about 150-foot heavily vegetated forest cover, where trees and logs might be placed on their own by Mother Nature. Things might move around. The forest floor is not entirely level, but to the best of our knowledge and our inspections, we see that the stormwater runoff that leaves these level spreaders is redistributed through these vegetated buffers and filtered and infiltrating. And we stand by that. and believe that the permit is operating in compliance with the approved design.
So you're disagreeing that intentionally adding logs to, I don't know, you just mentioned to address level spreader not malfunctioning, I guess. At
Well,
times.
stone could also be added to the level lip when, a rain event, or frost.
But that's not what we're, right.
We're talking about maintenance,
I
John.
agree.
Hey, Kevin,
Right,
might I just-
I'm not
Can I
disagreeing.
chime in, Kevin?
That's
Sure.
appropriate.
John, I think we did get your comment and we're happy to take any more. We just do want to avoid a back and forth argument. But just to be
Okay.
clear, I do, the placement of logs in the disconnection area below the level spreader, I believe is appropriately classified as a maintenance activity. The level spreaders, when functioning perfectly, distribute that water evenly. But as Kevin pointed out, the native forested area below it is not perfect. It's not intended to be perfect. Some concentration of water could occur. So putting, organic, native material there to provide, additional disbursement to ensure proper functioning does not require an amendment of the permit or the plans.
Okay, that's a better clarification. Thank you.
It looks like Annette has her hand up.
This is Annette Smith with Vermonters for a Clean Environment. I reviewed all the materials that are posted on the environmental notice bulletin, and I read the permit. I don't really understand what the purpose of this permit is, because what I would expect to see where we're looking at discharges to public waters would be the identification of the monitoring locations, would be reference to pre and post construction sampling to assure that the aquatic life is being protected. And instead, what I find is that there are 31 level spreaders, and the applicant has been able to have their expert choose 3 of them to study. And it just doesn't look to me like there's much in there that actually goes to the protection of headwaters and the effect of what is happening up on the mountain downstream. And I'm very disappointed in this, because it's been 10 years. This is an experimental system, and it creates a tremendous opportunity for science and for learning. And I understand that UVM has a very robust monitoring that they're doing out in the field. And I don't understand why this hasn't been opened up to a real investigation that provides real information. I mean, I learned nothing from reading the information that was submitted. And I don't even know when this permit expires. Does it say that it's a 5-year permit? And it's been 10 years and there wasn't a public process 5 years ago. I really don't understand why Green Mountain Power doesn't do what is in the public interest, and why the agency doesn't do this too, and work with the people who are, have expertise to do an honest evaluation of all of the stormwater features and actually see what is going on at each one, not 3 selected ones by the applicant's expert. It's almost looking like you're trying to cover something up. And, we've seen enough photos of the site. The iron flock is tremendously disturbing. Where is there any reference in in anything about what's happening with all this rusty water or iron water that is obviously very toxic? How is that addressed in the permit? I understand that these level spreaders have a lot of sediment. They're cleaned out and it's dumped uphill on the site. Has testing been done of that sediment? What does it contain? Where do we find this information? It's, we're watching the degradation of a high elevation system, and we've been trying to engage with the agency for years about a better way of evaluating this. And, when I read in the permit that it is, in compliance with all these things, just because I guess basically somebody says so, I don't compliance with anti-degradation and water quality standards. Well, how do you know when you haven't even done any? Is there monitoring going on of any streams uphill? Where do we find evidence of compliance except for because GMP's experts say so? I mean, I don't have any confidence in what's been going on here, and everything that I've seen in photographs only is even more depressing. And this is important. I was up there before it was blasted away and destroyed. There's tons of fines all over the impervious surfaces. Every rain, they're getting washed down into these level spreaders. They are creating channelized flow out of some of the level spreaders. How many? What's actually happening up there? We learn nothing from reading anything about this in this permit. And I just, I don't understand. I don't see anything in the permit itself that is protective of water quality. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. We'll go with Chris Owen, Native Fish Coalition.
Good evening. Chris Owen, Chair of the Vermont Chapter Native Fish Coalition. Am I coming through loud and clear?
Yes, we can hear you just fine. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, good. Native Fish Coalition is a grassroots, all-volunteer nonprofit originating in the state of Maine in the year 2017. It's a fast-growing movement, and since that time, we've added 8 state chapters from Alabama northward to the 3 northern New England states. In Vermont, the focal species of Native Fish Coalition is the wild native brook trout. It's a sentinel species, very sensitive to changes in its environment. What concerns us this evening? The stormwater discharges from the 27 acres of impervious surface created by the Lowell Wind project. For a census scale, that's the equivalent to space of 11 Walmart stores. A lot of hard surface to be collected and carefully release clean water into the most pristine headwaters. The site work for the Lowell Wind project exposed rocks and minerals that were encapsulated for 12,000 years since the last ice age by soil development and vegetation. And that buffer helped separate the heavy metals and minerals from local waterways. Now rainwater rushes over the impervious surfaces, collecting the exposed minerals and heavy metals at the very top of the watershed, where they can only go one way, downhill. At the top of the watershed, waters are normally the most pristine, and anything above 2,500 feet in the state of Vermont is categorized as the highest water quality rating, A1. Our waters and its quality are public trust. This water belongs to the state of Vermont. The project owner, by virtue of a permit, is obligated not to degrade this resource. That's the concept. The reality in our observations is different. There are 50 individual stormwater systems, as noted, designed to capture the runoff, slow it down, filter out sediments. How a system appears on plans and how it performs on steep mountain slopes are 2 different matters. From the viewpoint of water quality, Native Fish Coalition has 2 distinct concerns. First is the high energy velocity discharge of volumes of stormwater on steep mountain slopes and the erosion that results from that. Earlier witnesses have talked about that. First-person accounts. The erosion opens the soil to ongoing turbidity in streams downslope, along with elevated levels of sediment. Sediment in stream bottom impacts the food chain downstream. As a remark, and as a former state regulator, I am surprised to frankly hear the defensiveness of the two civil servants who seem to be defending or making the case for the applicant, for the permittee. I would hope that there could be more impartiality by the state agency and its employees to take an impartial, objective, hard-nosed look at what's happening there and hold the project developer accountable. Our second concern is about mixing that precipitation, the runoff, the stormwater, the snowmelt with newly exposed subsoils laden with arsenic, chromium, copper, nickel, lead, and other metals. Informal sediment samples collected in 2016 suggest metal levels exceed the state's Water Quality Management Division's rating for threshold effect concentrations. And concentrations above those levels are believed to cause or may have adverse effects on aquatic organisms downstream. The state has published recommended guidelines for evaluating contaminant concentrations, so-called Appendix D. I don't see a date, but it reads threshold effect concentrations, TECs. If they are exceeded, it is likely that further site assessment in the form of biological community assessment, toxicity testing, and both will be required. I would encourage DEC to invoke that guideline and test the silt that is produced by the runoff. So why does all this matter? It's just soil and water. It matters because of the life downstream. The mission of Native Fish Coalition is preserve and protect wild native fish in their habitat. The species is highly specialized. It survives only in the coldest and cleanest water. It has evolved in these waters since the last ice age, though it has been extricated in much of its range, disappearing from some 85% of its original range along the Appalachian spine. Fortunately, upland streams in northern New England, including Lowell Mountain, remain a stronghold for wild native trout. It's imperative that we protect its habitat. Wild native trout are highly intolerant of degraded water quality. Concentrations of metals such as copper are toxic to them. It is likely that metal-laden sediments are being released into the 8 named brooks that originate from the site. Wild native trout require cold water found in mountain brooks. The forest canopy over the stream keeps the water cool. Temperatures of 68 Fahrenheit or higher are stressful. Above 72, lethal. Regrettably, the tree canopy at the mountaintop has been removed. Warming water they need to be the coldest. Brook trout are part of a food chain. It survives on aquatic insects such as mayflies, caddis, stoneflies, diphtheria, even the larvae that give us the black fly. There are 36 distinct invertebrate families in the headwaters of Lowell Mountain. These too are intolerant of water quality changes. With that is very general background. Native Fish Coalition has 3 specific recommendations for permit requirements. Monitor the water quality, fish populations, and aquatic biota closer to the discharge points, high up on the mountainside. At present, the monitoring sites are occurring 1 and 2 miles distance near the valley floor, where many intervening tributaries not associated with the project enter the stream and give a false sample to what is really happening for discharges at the mountaintop. Move the water quality testing points higher upslope and find out what is really being discharged from the site. As others have said, we strongly encourage DEC to invoke independent water quality and aquatic biota testing for the project. It's trite to say that this is the fox guarding the hen house, perhaps with a basic stormwater parking lot. You might get by with self-certifications and water of lower certification, but these are our most important waters in the state of Vermont at the headwater, and they deserve the highest standard of proof possible. Let's have a permit condition that calls for an independent consultant and not self-certification. Finally, we recommend that there be ongoing evaluations, suitable disposal of collected sediment, simply scraping it out of the pits and putting it back uphill resembles the myth of Sisyphus. That sediment should be tested and removed off-site and disposed of in accordance with law and regulation if it's shown to exceed levels prescribed by state and federal standards. And with that, I will conclude remarks for the Native Fish Coalition. I appreciate the opportunity to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Jeff, I saw your hand up earlier. Would you still like to comment? Jeff?
Yes, I just wasn't sure if there would be anybody else from the public that wanted to speak, so I didn't want to interrupt. So I can go.
Sure, go ahead. When you're ready.
Thanks. All right, gentlemen, it's been a good number of years since we've seen each other, so I hope you're all safe and healthy. And I do look forward to coming back up to Vermont again for my vacations, because it's a beautiful state that you guys have there. I'm here representing Vermonters for a Clean Environment. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Vermont. I have been one for at least a decade now, or actually more than 15 years now. And I have a number of comments that I want to bring up. The first is with regard to, I went through the monitoring plan and I saw on multiple, for especially LSA9 and LSA18, which are the ones that were documented, they seem to be continuously collecting turbid-laden sediment, which is an indication to me that the site is not yet stabilized, or at least there is significant erosion issues that are occurring. I do not believe that the level spreaders were necessarily designed to deal with that high of a concentration of turbidity associated with them. I did also, if you of course, you guys understand how detention basins work when you have turbidity and suspended solids. It's really a matter of containment and time. And the level spreaders were obviously not intended to provide residence time in the level spreaders themselves, rather than collect the water and then, in theory, as you stated, if they work perfectly, then the idea is the water spreads over and the water is run through the leaf litter and plant and vegetation in the forest, and according to the original application, it's the turbidity and suspended solids are, in theory, or purported by the applicant's consultant to be absorbed in that disconnect area. But with this high amount of turbidity, I don't necessarily believe that that's likely the case, and that's likely not is occurring. The sediment sampling locations, as Ms. Smith had specifically stated, there weren't any location maps or provided, at least that we saw in the application, the current application. With that said, one of the concerns I do have, and Mr. Burke, you stated that this permit will also provide the approval to accept the level spreaders as, I guess, acceptable stormwater practices going forward. And one of the things that was pointed out by Mr. Lindholm as well, and I have also specifically witnessed it years ago when I was up at the site, the flow down into the disconnect areas is not running down the 150 feet as sheet flow as purported in the model. It is channelized flow, and it is shallow concentrated flow, which is going down the mountain, which, if that is the case, then the models are not likely representing the attenuation in both peak flow as well as the pollutant loading and recharge or infiltration provided by those level spreaders. I would challenge you to, if it hasn't been done, they need to document the flow as it's flowing down off of the level spreaders. I also believe that the models should be modified to reflect the actual shallow concentrated flow, not sheet flow, that is going down, that it was modeled. As you guys are probably aware, there's a statement that all models are wrong and some are useful. And my professional opinion is these models are wrong and they're not reflecting reality and therefore are not useful in the determination on whether or not these level spreaders are actually functioning. I really don't believe, and you've only analyzed or monitored several of the dozens of level spreaders that are on the site. The wood that Mr. Lindholm stated, I've seen photographs of these, and they're not simply maintenance activities, they're attempts at redirecting flow because it's apparent below the wood that was placed and they were staked into the ground that the flow is concentrating and creating erosion, and therefore there was an attempt at to try to remedy that. Although the disconnect areas are supposed to be left untouched and undisturbed. The theory behind the applicant in the original application was that those areas would not need to be touched and that they would naturally flow, allow water to flow and be infiltrated. And yet there's now evidence of activity and that is going on below these level spreaders, and of all the level spreaders we've only seen a few. And so I've actually been out there and witnessed the evidence of shallow concentrated flow, which is evidenced, as Mr. Lindholm said, I've seen the same thing. You see the soil, it exposes root hairs, which means the trees are not able to keep up with the erosion that's occurring. And so their roots become exposed, and that will lead to the loss of those trees as well. I went over the turbidity. And also the other thing is, if you go to, of course, we're not allowed on the site. And so there are a number of different wet ponds that were designed for the Kingdom Community Wind project. The majority of them, the vast majority, are located on the ridge line along the main crane path for the turbines. If you go to Google Earth, the wet ponds are designed specifically in the Vermont's stormwater manual to have a permanent water surface elevation because that is what is most effective at capturing suspended sediment and turbidity and allowing it to have the time, the residence time within the water body in order to settle out the particulates before they're discharged downstream. The majority of those, quote, wet ponds as they were designed on the plans, and you can line up the plans with the aerial photographs, show most of them as empty. So there's two things that are likely occurring. They're either being bypassed and not receiving any flow, or the water is actually seeping down and through the rock and then likely downstream and bypassing this. I have specifically witnessed this back in 2012 when I was up at the site, and you could see that water was going through the rock and not through the outlet structures. So even these traditional accepted BMPs and stormwater management basins on the ridge line are not in compliance with the original approved permit. There's no denying it. The aerial photographs from subsequent and repeated years show that most of those wet ponds are not holding any water at all. They're dry as a bone. And so this isn't necessarily just an issue about level spreaders and whether they should be accepted as permanent BMPs, because they frankly have not even been given an opportunity to show that they can perform, because the site keeps eroding turbid water down into them. The traditional stormwater basins and wet ponds are not even functioning. So I'm not sure how that DEC can reissue their stormwater permit when they're clearly and photographically documented being out of compliance with their permit. And I'd be happy to go up there with any of you to take a look at it. So maybe the aerial photographs happen to capture it at a bad time, but I doubt it, because there were numerous photographs, and continuously in every year that there are aerial photographs of the site, those wet ponds are dry, which means that the applicant is not meeting the standard of their water quality certificate for the project. And so that is something that must be remedied. Those now dry ponds either need to be retrofitted to be functioning as extended detention basins in order to, and then there will also then need to be modifications to be able to address their potential to reduce improve water quality before the stormwater is discharged from the site. So, very quickly in summary, the level spreaders, before they're approved, should be remodeled based on the existing conditions that are occurring out there now, which means it's not sheet flow, it's shallow concentrated flow or channelized flow that is occurring out there. And they should be compared to the peak flow standards that they were supposed to meet with. And the drop and the site needs to be further stabilized. It's been a decade. It's been almost a decade actually since the site's been completed, and yet there is evidence based on the monitoring itself that the turbidity the erosion is still continuing to occur on those impervious surfaces and discharging to downstream resources. So the approval of these level spreaders, they still have not yet gained the amount of data that is needed to approve them. Plus, you've only done 2 of dozens of level spreaders. The existing approved wet ponds that are already approved to be used and were approved as traditional measures are all not functioning correctly. And finally, as we had stated in the original application, your monitoring stations are thousands of feet downstream from these level spreader discharges into the stream, and all the streams on Lowell Mountain, all the way up to the very top at their headwaters, are regulated waters, and there is no evidence to show that those headwaters have been protected through monitoring and the collection of data. So with that said, that is my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Pat, would you like to provide comment?
Talking to me, Kevin? Pat Sagri?
Yes. Yes, you,
Is that
Pat.
the right guy? Okay,
Yep.
Thank you. My name is Pat Sagri. I live in Westfield, north of the town of Lowell, and I'm not a water expert. My comments are more about good public process. And Green Mountain Power has not been the greatest neighbor in many respects. Over the course of this project, they've had their wrists slapped by the FTC, by the public advocate at the Department of Public Service or Public Service Department, with whatever it's called that now, and also by the state of Connecticut. So there's a trust issue here. And I know that that's messy places for people with permits, and you meet these criteria. But I wanted to point out that some years ago, Cabot's indirect discharge permit came up, and there was a lot of reaction to it. There was a lot of concern. Secretary Moore was involved. She was at Stone Environmental at that time. And the idea was to bring more transparency to the permitting process. And I would like to propose that that happen here. And some of the comments earlier about that Green Mountain Power not be self-monitoring, that the requirement for independent experts. I would encourage you to check in with Secretary Moore, check in with Cabot even. I think they really appreciated the process and what they learned from it. But the reality is the water is ours. It is not Green Mountain Power's. And we are yet somehow kind of on the sidelines. That's certainly how I feel as someone who has been watching Green Mountain Power's management. I also visited the site early on. I'm not a water expert, but I did visit the site. And when we were shown the level spreaders, I made a point of walking downstream. The turbines weren't even completely installed yet. And there was already rilling in so-called undisturbed land. So I can only imagine people like Jeff Goff, who have the technical expertise to really evaluate these things. But just as a layperson, you really had to wonder if these systems were going to work. So I would ask that there be a way for the public to be involved, and that there is a shared, as we did with Cabot, that there is a shared process for choosing experts to do the evaluations, to do the testing. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Jeff, did you still have another comment? Your hand was still up. Jeff Gall.
No, I was also muted myself. No, I don't have any additional comments. Sorry, my hand got stuck in the air.
It looks like Mark Whitworth. Do you have something else, Mark?
Yeah, thanks. I too am not a water expert, but this project has been controversial from the get-go, and it remains controversial. It sounds like there's photographic evidence that permit conditions are not being met. It sounds like monitoring is not being conducted in a broad enough way, and it sounds like Green Mountain Power gets to choose the people that monitor their own work. As Jeff said, Fox is guarding the hen houses. The suggestions that Jeff made and that Vermonters for a Clean Environment have made seem not only reasonable, but prudent. And I would think that Green Mountain Power would want to accept these recommendations and act on them and carry out monitoring the way that that Jeff has described and that Annette has described. And I can't imagine why they would not. Well, I can't imagine why they would not want to do it, but it certainly seems like not carrying out these recommendations, it looks like a cover-up. So in the interest of transparency, in the interest of winning public confidence in a project that has been so controversial, I would expect Green Mountain Power to want to do these things, and I don't see any reason why they shouldn't want to do them. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I guess I would just add that, just folks also need to recognize that this is a stormwater permit for the discharge from impervious surfaces, but it's not the only permit and not the only requirement that was applicable to the project. There was a water quality certification that involved detailed monitoring and monitoring completed in accordance with, state guidelines for selecting monitoring locations. There were wetlands permits, certificate of public good. So there's a lot of different requirements that were implemented as part of this project. So I think, some of the comments do speak specifically to the stormwater management system in this permit. There are a fair amount of comments and questions that have come up that probably stray into some other areas and other requirements of the project. Jeff?
Now my hand is raised again. I appreciate your comment there. The water quality certificate is linked to the stormwater permit. So I just wanted to clarify that, or make clear that the commentary I'm providing sort of relates to both the stormwater permit, both for erosion and sediment control, stormwater quality, peak flow quantities, as well as related to the water quality certificates. Also, as I recall, the sampling plan was probably not something that was specified in a manual. It was something that was negotiated between the applicant and DEC, as I understand. Having reviewed it, they were placed at certain locations based on the VHB's, the consultant's judgment.
To that point,
and
Jeff, you're correct.
Thanks.
John?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, Kevin, I neglected to introduce myself. I'm representing, despite my byline saying Calais Select Board or VCE, I'm representing Vermonters for a Clean Environment tonight. So sorry about that error. You know, I know Patrick knows this. I don't know if you were around then, Kevin, when I worked at the ANR solid waste program. But I worked there for some 20 years. By the way, I'm a hydrogeologist too, just like Jeff Nelson. And I worked in 2 different private consulting firms. So I know the role and responsibility of a private, Patrick did too, of a private consultant. I think Patrick might have worked for Hind, Illinois, if I'm not mistaken, back in the good old days. It's not news to me, or wouldn't surprise me if someone were to say that a consultant hired by a private sector entity in the context of a permitting process, their role is to provide the most favorable presentation or picture of the situation possible. Their job is to do whatever is in their power, as it was my job when I was a private consultant, to do what was necessary within bounds, and we pushed those bounds to see that our client was able to get the permits they needed to get their project through. And if it was a remediation project, to minimize and mitigate the costs of that remediation and minimize and mitigate the liability. Frankly, I worked on the Woburn project. That was a bad one down in Mass, for those who know about that. So when I was in the solid waste program, this is important. We had this go around and around. We had discharges, not too different than what Jeff Gall noted, that were expressed at the coming from the subsurface. They were coming from the CV landfill in East Montpelier, running under Route 2, and then coming out the embankment, the steep embankment, and the riprap, and discharging iron flock water, not different than what has already been made reference to tonight, into the river. And of course, we tested it and we found what you would expect to come from landfill leachate. It's an unlined landfill. And so engineering staff and myself were pushing to get that addressed, and we had our position on it. And a consulting firm hired by the owners of CV Landfill at that time pushed against what we saw, the ANR regulatory staff saw as the correct fix. And around we went for 3 years. And I think fortunately, and I think different in this case, and more in alignment with what Pat Sagway said occurred with Cabot, which is a success story, in my opinion, and a success story for Cabot Creamery. In the case of CV Landfill, their attorney, Steve Rainis, former chair of the Environmental Board, said, well, you know, there seems to be a wide gulf between what ANR officials are saying and what our consultants, my client's consultants, are saying. And I just, truth be told, Steve Rainis and I had talked off record and said, why don't we get an independent consultant? Because Steve was saying he trusted his guy's opinion, and I said I trusted our opinion, of course. But Steve said, hey, we'll fund that, and we'll put up to, I forget the dollar amount, $20,000. And so what we then did, Dave DiDomenico was the engineer on this. We came up with a list of consultants, and you know, if there were any conflicts, ANR maybe having hired them in the past, they were scratched off. And if there are any conflicts with CV Landfill or their affiliates having hired in the past, they were scratched off. And we actually hired a consulting firm out of New Jersey. We really had to go that far and wide to find someone that hadn't worked for, you know, the parties. And they came in, and the consultant did say, he goes, this is a first. And this guy was a hydrogeologist, the principal guy. we spoke with and met with at the landfill. He said, this is a wonderful thing that I'm allowed to be fully objective and not an advocate for any side, just pure science. This is what we're asking for. And what occurred in the CV landfill case was the pure science showed that the approach, the fix to mitigate and as best we could with an unlined landfill, eliminate or severely reduce the discharge was a synthetic cap. And that's what went on. And, you know, to their credit, CV landfill and Steve Rainis's credit, they honored the decision of that independent, and we got the synthetic cap and we were able to move forward. So I just want to put that out there. It's the job of the consultant working for the client to minimize the liability, to minimize the costs, to minimize the risk to the project, quite frankly. If this were insurmountable and the impacts were found to be pretty serious, that may present certain risks and even penalties. So it's really in A&R's interest, folks, to be neutral regulators, to show neutrality. We've been saying this for 10 years. It's been said for 10 years. I was hearing when I worked at A&R that we need to see a neutral eye, an objective third-party consultant. Green Mountain Power can put the money in a fund. A&R can put it out for RFP, and then let the chips fall where they may. And you know, if it backs up what Jeff Nelson's firm has found all along, wonderful. Then we're all wrong, and what we're seeing is not so bad, and that's a good thing. And if they find there are problems, so too wonderful, because now we can move on with next steps and correct the deficiencies and get it done. This round and around thing, you know, and I don't know why A&R would not say, we trust the consultant from GMP to be the same as a neutral. So let's go with a neutral and see if there's any different. What a great way to test out that theory. Let's do it. Simple clause. So that's my comment for right now. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Pat, do you have another question or comment?
No, I'm good. I thought that was a great example that John gave, and that's it. Thank you.
Your hand is still raised, just so you know.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not very savvy with all this. I don't even know how to get rid of it, but ignore it. Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, Annette.
Yes, Annette Smith with Vermonters for a Clean Environment. I want to follow up on Pat Sagway's comments, and I think that my comments are more directed towards the half a dozen people from Green Mountain Power who are on this call. I was involved in the Cabot Agrimark stakeholder process. I've also been involved in the OMIA stakeholder process. I also met with GMP people in 2009 for 3.5 hours, asking them to please do it differently and work with the community on the experts to hire. And they declined. But I will say that having seen what I've seen with this permit proposed for renewal, which does anybody really want to go through another appeal of this? And seeing what I've seen in photos and videos of the site, that it would truly benefit everyone to work together on evaluating the site in a fair and honest way, which I do not believe has happened, and it's time for it to happen. Everything changes when you sit down and work together. And we've dealt with extremely contentious projects. And when you agree on the experts to hire, when people have confidence in that work, when the companies are willing to pay for the work, that will give people that confidence, then it makes a huge difference. And right now, nobody has any reason to trust either the Agency of Natural Resources or Green Mountain Power with the results of what is proposed to be put in this permit. And it has tremendous ramifications for future high elevation projects if this permit goes through and these previously considered experimental level splitters are blessed as an approved technology. And on these high elevation slopes where we know they're failing, this is not an acceptable management practice to protect our waters, especially given what's going on our planet right now. So I implore the parties who are involved in this to work with people to come up with a way to independently evaluate this. I strongly urge ANR to take these comments seriously, in particular, Jeff Gall's comments, and do not issue this permit and give Green Mountain Power a chance to restore its integrity, because right now this process and this permitting process has no credibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. Okay, John. I also want to just, before you speak, John, I think it's important, you know, just as we would typically have at a in-person public meeting, we try to, you know, encourage folks to make their comment when it's their turn, and not sort of have this repeat ongoing back and forth, you know, new comments feeding off everybody else's comment. I want to give everybody a chance to speak, but I also, you know, if you have more comments, come forward. But you know, this isn't necessarily a chat, which is why the chat feature was disabled.
Evan, that's never been my experience, having run my own public hearings, public informational meetings, such as you sitting in your seat. So I will disagree that that's the normal way. That might be your approach, your program's approach, and I appreciate that. But I'm not feeding off, but people make a comment and then you like have this not quite eureka moment. My wife's interrupting. Please stop, Joanne. Well, I'm gonna have to go to another room. Now I lost my thought. Oh, so Annette suggested that the permit not be issued. What could also happen, not to undermine Annette Smith, who's my boss, but as an alternative, you could limit the term, and this has been done before, because the term is up to 5 years, I believe, which means you could issue it for 5 minutes or 5 years or somewhere in between. You issue the permit for a shorter term with a methodology laid out for investigating the concerns that we've raised. And then at the conclusion of that investigation by a third-party consultant, hired by ANR, funded by the permittees, then a decision point would be reached as to how to move forward. Do you install systems that correct the deficits up there? Is everything great? You just move forward and issue a 5-year, then issue a 5-year permit again, or something in between. So that's what I'm suggesting. There are myriad approaches that you have the power to, you know, follow or pursue. So thank you.
Thanks, John. Chris?
The thought that occurs is if Green Mountain Power and some of its adversaries in this discussion wanted to make a working group, perhaps they could team up and try to find some middle ground. I know from monitoring legislative activities, the chair of a House or Senate committee, the last thing they want to see is a hard-knuckled fist fight be dragged into their committee room for the committee members to resolve. The shrewd players negotiate outside the room and come to the regulatory or legislative body and say, we've worked things out, can you please endorse it? So I think that I will toss that out as a concept. I noticed Jason's still on the line, and I saw the symbol for Kristen Carlson, Green Mountain Power's public relations person on board. Have those discussions at corporate headquarters and see if you'd like to talk further.
Thanks, Chris. Don't see a lot of hands up, so I'm getting close to making a conclusion that everyone has had their chance to provide comment that wanted to do so. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, the comment period does remain open for another 7 days following this meeting tonight. So there is still ample opportunity if you weren't comfortable speaking tonight or something else is on your mind in the next few days and you want to submit comment, you certainly can do so through the online environmental notice bulletin. If you don't have access to that, certainly give me a call, and there's probably another way we can accept your comments in writing, either by email or some other form. So with that, I'd just like to thank everybody for participating. If anybody does need to access any of the application materials related to the draft permit on notice, those are also available on the environmental notice bulletin for download. And if you have any other questions, you can get in touch with me. Annette?
Yes, how do I get a copy of the video? Will you send it to me, Kevin?
Of this public meeting?
Yes.
Yes, this is the first I've recorded. But once it downloads and is provided to me, I can probably get a copy to you.
Thank you. We did that with a different program, and the person who ran the meeting kindly sent out the video afterwards upon request. So I would appreciate getting it. I wonder, I wrote to you a day or two ago about the phone number information, and I didn't get a response. Did you get my email?
No.
Then it must be in your spam filter.
It's possible. I know some of your emails had gone there in the past, but I had added you to the safe sender. So
yeah, I thought I was
apologize.
clear. So I'm, that was a problem because there was no way to tell people how to phone in. So
that was that phone number information was updated on the ENB.
Yeah, but most people don't know what the ENB is. So it should have been there in the first place. So I just wanted to flag that I'd appreciate getting the video, and you guys got to check your spam filter. I check mine every day. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. With that, thank you again, and everyone have a good night.
Thank you. Appreciate it.